Welcome back to another episode of Revealing Biblical Truths. Today we'll be looking at the biblical site of Jericho. But before we get into it, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment down below on sites you want to see. Now let's talk about Jericho. If the Bible is historically accurate when it describes the Israelite conquest of Canaan, we should expect to find some archaeological evidence to support this significant event. The question is, what kind of evidence should we expect to find? When reading the book of Joshua, we get some impression that the Israelites launched a swift and massive invasion of Canaan, pillaging and destroying cities wherever they went. The archaeological record in the 15th century BC shows no conquest of this kind in Canaan. This has led some to look for signs of a conquest in the 13th century, while others have abandoned the idea of a conquest altogether, opting for other theories as to the account for the appearance of the Israelites in Canaan, such as the gradual settlement theory or internal process model. This is an illustration of the late Bronze Age Jericho. A careful reading of both Joshua and Judges reveals that the Israelites did not immediately take over the entire land, destroying all the cities, rebuilding their own cities, and establishing their own in-district material culture. In Joshua 24:13, Yah tells his people, "I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant." Rather than destroying all of the cities, the Israelites lived mostly in the Canaanite cities they had once taken in them. Moreover, the Israelites did not conquer all of Canaan. There were numerous groups that they did not drive out. In Joshua 17:12, we read, "Yet the people of Manasseh could not take possession of those cities, but the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in that land." Similar descriptions of the places that were not conquered are found in Joshua 11:22, 13:1-5, and 16:10. Since the Bible describes a limited, prolonged conquest of Canaan, with the Israelites living amidst the local population, the distinct archaeological record of their presence would be limited. So, what kind of evidence should we expect to find in Canaan? 3 cities are specifically described in the book of Joshua as being destroyed and burned. Jericho in chapter 6, verse 24, Ai, chapter 8, verse 28, and Hazor, chapter 11, verse 11. Indeed, we do find archaeological evidence for the destruction by fire at Jericho, Ai, and Hazor around 1400 BC, exactly as the Bible describes. In Joshua 6, we read a description of the fall of Jericho, which provides several more clues about its demise. Here are 3 pieces of archaeological evidence that affirm details of the biblical account. Here, archaeologist Dr. Brian Wood points to collapsed mud bricks from the city wall that fell to the base of the retaining wall at Jericho. One of the most vivid elements of the fall of Jericho, as described in Scripture, is the walls that came tumbling down. In Joshua 6:20, we read, "So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city." The phrase "fell down flat" is translated from 2 Hebrew words, nafal, to fall, and tachat, bottom or below. Thus, a literal understanding would be that the wall fell below itself. Excavations at Jericho have revealed that this is precisely what happened. Here we see a schematic cross-section diagram of the fortification system at Jericho based on Kenyon's West Trench. Canaanite Jericho was an imposing city, with not one wall but 2, an inner wall and an outer wall. The outer mud brick wall had been built atop a revetment wall, making it twice as high. Between the 2 walls was a sloped rampart, with an upper wall encircling the inner city. When Kathleen Kenyon excavated on the west side of the wall of the tell, she discovered a heavily filled fallen brick wall piling nearly to the top of the revetment. This was probably from the wall of the summit on the bank. The current Italian-Palestinian team found the identical destruction at the southern end of the mound as well. Archaeologist Dr. Brian Wood explains, although Kenyon found the revetment wall and the earthen rampart, she did not find the city wall itself on top of the tell, but astoundingly, a heap of fallen red bricks, colored bright red in the diagram below lay outside the revetment wall. These bricks almost certainly came from the city wall on top of the tell, or from a mud brick parapet wall atop the revetment wall, or both. Amazingly, this pile of red bricks, which went almost to the top of the revetment wall, would have been a natural siege ramp that would have allowed the Israelites to go up into the city, just as the Bible describes. This cross-section drawing of Canaan's West Trench shows a fallen red mud bricks from the top of the collapsed city wall that reached almost to the top of the revetment wall, creating a natural siege ramp. One final note about the walls: excavations have revealed that the fortification system from the final Canaanite city of Jericho was constructed in the Middle Bronze Age, not in the Late Bronze Age, when the Bible places of destruction of Jericho. This has led some to conclude that the final Canaanite city was destroyed 150 years earlier, in the Middle Bronze Age, and that there is no city of Jericho for Joshua to defeat. However, this seems to stretch the evidence. All we can conclude is that the walls that fell were constructed in the Middle Bronze Age. This fact is explained by Yigal Yadin, an archaeologist. Evidence of a Late Bronze Age town was also found, but Canaan could not find even a trace of a Late Bronze Age wall. How could the walls of Jericho come tumbling down during the Late Bronze Age if there was no Late Bronze Age wall around the town? There may be an explanation. In many cases, the Late Bronze Age people did not actually build new fortifications, but rather reused Middle Bronze Age fortifications, strengthening them where necessary. Interpreters often overlook this fact, and it may be an important bearing on the case for Jericho. It may well be that the Late Bronze Age settlement at Jericho reused the city wall from the Middle Bronze Age. The textual, ceramic, and glyphic evidence indicates that Jericho was occupied when the city was destroyed in the Late Bronze Age. Dr. Titus Kennedy summarizes: since at Jericho no city wall was built at any time in the Late Bronze Age, but finds there demonstrate habitation through Late Bronze Age 1, based on evidence from other sites, it is extremely likely that Middle Bronze Age 3 wall at Jericho was also reused until the Late Bronze Age 1, when the city was destroyed and abandoned. This is the southern portion of the revetment wall at Old Testament Jericho. The red brick outer wall would have stood on top of the revetment wall. Before the Battle of Jericho, the Israelites sent 2 spies to check out the city. When they discovered, they hid in the house of Rahab the prostitute. The Bible describes her house as being located in part of the city wall with a window looking out to the city, through which she let down the spies so they could escape. Joshua 2:5. Moreover, when they had taken the city, Joshua says to the men who had spied on Jericho, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out, and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." Joshua 6:22. This implies that the portion of the wall which Rahab's house was located did not fall with the rest of the city walls. When the Germans excavated Jericho in 1907, they discovered a portion of the wall on the north side of the city that had not fallen. Moreover, there were houses built on the rampart against the outer city wall. These walls were thin, only 1 brick width, indicating this was likely a poor part of the city. It is possible that this was an area of the city which Rahab's house was in. A section of the northern wall of Jericho, which did not collapse as pictured here. Rahab's house was most likely in this area of the city. Both John Garstang, who excavated Jericho in the 1930s, and Kathleen Kingan, who excavated there in the 50s, found storage jars filled with burnt grain. In fact, Kingan was over 6 bushels of grain in one season alone. She found these. It would seem to be a strange discovery, as grain was a primary staple for food in ancient peoples. If Jericho was under siege for an extended period of time, it was the usual military tactic of the day. The grain would have been eaten. If the city had fallen after a short siege, it would have been taken as an important source of food. Here is pictured a jar found with burnt grain in the destruction layer of the city fort at Jericho. This affirms Joshua 6:24. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it. The discovery of numerous jars full of burnt grain in the destroyed homes of the Canaanite city of Jericho affirms several important biblical details. The Battle of Jericho occurred in the spring of the year, Joshua 3:15 and 5:10, which would have been shortly after the harvest. The jars of grain indicate that the city is indeed destroyed in the spring of the year, shortly after harvest. The siege of Jericho was only 7 days in length, Joshua 6:4. Large quantities of burnt grain in the houses excavated by Kingen and Garstang indicate that there was no prolonged siege prior to Jericho's destruction. And the city of Jericho was devoted to Yah for destruction, and the Israelites were not to take the plunder, Joshua 6:17 through 24. This fact explains why the grain was burned and not taken. In summary, the lack of widespread Israelite archaeological footprint in the 15th century BC is consistent with the biblical accounts of a prolonged and limited conquest of Canaan. This does not mean, however, that there is an absence of evidence for the conquest of Canaan. The discoveries made by numerous excavation teams at Jericho are consistent with the historical account of the Battle of Jericho as recorded in the Bible. The Bible is true. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Till next time, Shalom.